Old St. Joseph's Church stands a few blocks from Independence Hall in the heart of historic Philadelphia. We'll take a closer look at this church, which one prominent Catholic historian called the fountain of religion in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
God bless America.
God love you. I want these to be my first words of greeting to you. They will be the concluding words on each broadcast.
I am not the Catholic candidate for president. I am the Democratic Party's candidate for president.
Annuncio optis Gaudium Magnum. Habemus Papam.
You've embarked on a Catholic history trek.
With this episode, I begin and continue a series on early Catholicism in the 50 states. These will certainly not be comprehensive treatments, and they won't even necessarily cover the very first Catholic presence in the respective states, which were often fleeting visits by missionaries. But they will be important stories around the beginnings of Catholicism in each of these states, often centered around a particular historic church. I've already covered two of these states in episodes that introduced chapters in my book, one on Maryland and one on Kentucky, the latter focused on St. Thomas Church in Bardstown, and I also covered St. Joseph's Church in Somerset for the state of Ohio. This time, we'll look at the beginnings of the Catholic Church in the state of Pennsylvania, with a focus on Old St. Joseph's Church in Philadelphia. In British North America, the public practice of Catholicism was banned in most colonies throughout most of their history leading up to the Revolution. Maryland was an exception, but as I mentioned in that podcast, even there the faith was repressed after Protestants took control of the colony. Ironically then, it wasn't the Catholic colony of Maryland where Catholics enjoyed the most religious freedom during the colonial period. It was instead the non-Catholic colony of Pennsylvania. That was a function of the religious persuasion of Pennsylvania's founders, including William Penn. They were Quakers, a Christian sect that was noted for, among other things, opposition to slavery and support of religious freedom. While it's not the case that Pennsylvania was entirely favorable to Catholicism throughout this period, the controlling law of the colony remained open to the practice of the faith, and the result was that for a period of time in the mid-18th century, the only place that public Catholic worship was permitted by law in the British Empire was in Pennsylvania. The only church in Pennsylvania was in Philadelphia. It was Old St. Joe's. The parish has its origins in 1733, 1 year after nearby Independence Hall was built, when the Jesuit missionary Joseph Grayton built a chapel attached to his residence on Walnut Street in what is now deep within Old Philadelphia, but was then on the outskirts of the town. There were about 30 or 40 parishioners. In an effort to keep the peace with Philadelphians who weren't excited about a Catholic church in their backyard, St. Joe's has had from the beginning an inconspicuous presence in the city. Even today, to gain the main entrance, you must walk down Willings Alley and turn into a courtyard. There's no grand facade or soaring Gothic steeple to announce its presence. Its very architecture is a window into the world of colonial America, where Catholicism was practiced on the down low, when it was practiced at all. In 1757, the original chapel was replaced by a larger church, and there have been several reconstructions and renovations over the centuries since. Given its placement in Philadelphia, and as one of the few Catholic churches in the colonies during the Revolution, St. Joe's witnessed many prominent personages, including French allies such as Marquis de Lafayette and Count Rochambeau. Though it must be admitted that nearby St. Mary's, a larger church constructed in the 1760s, was the venue of choice for major events such as the Thanksgiving Mass for Victory at Yorktown, at which future President John Adams got his first taste of a Catholic liturgy. It didn't agree with him for the most part. Both of these churches were served by Jesuits in the 18th century. The Jebbies were pretty much the only thing going in the British colonies at this time, Catholic priest-wise. Father Henry Neale assisted Father Grayton, then Father Robert Harding succeeded Father Grayton, and he served St. Joseph's until his death in 1772. In the meantime, Father Ferdinand Farmer had come to help with the churches in Philadelphia. Father Farmer, a.k.a. Steinmeier, was a German Jesuit, and his services were desired because an increasing number of Philly's Catholic people were of German ethnicity. Father Farmer helped lay the foundations of Catholicism in many parts of the colonies, especially in Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. He was also an accomplished scholar, a reputation that earned him the respect of non-Catholic Americans as well. In the late 18th century, he was appointed to the Board of Trustees of the University of Pennsylvania, which had been founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1740, and is also one of my alma maters. Farmer was buried in the cemetery of Old St. Joe's. That small cemetery was later closed and the remains transferred to other Catholic cemeteries in the city. The Jesuit presence at St. Joe's created an interesting interlude. The Society of Jesus was suppressed by the Pope in 1773, and so the priests serving in Philly at the time, Robert Molyneux and Ferdinand Farmer, ceased to be Jesuits, though their sacramental ministry continued unabated, and Molyneux and others obtained permission from the Pope to reformulate the society in the United States in 1806. The society would be restored worldwide in 1814. Molyneux was serving as the president of Georgetown College near the nation's capital when he died in 1808. In the meantime, some other important things had happened. Philadelphia was at the center of revolutionary ferment. The Declaration of Independence in July of 1776, then war and occupation by the British while General Washington wintered in Valley Forge. On March 1, 1781, the Continental Congress adopted the ratified Articles of Confederation, formally creating the United States. That evening, Father Farmer, with Father Molyneux and the French minister among others present, chanted a Te Deum in St. Joe's to celebrate the event. Following independence, the Catholic population of the U.S. slowly grew as religious freedom was gradually extended throughout the new nation. By 1787, the year the Constitution was ratified, St. Joseph's had grown to 3,000 members. 2 years later, the first diocese of Baltimore was created. And then in 1808, 4 new dioceses were erected: Boston, New York, Bardstown, and Philadelphia, where Old St. Mary's became the first cathedral. It's been common for Catholic parishes to be the springboards for educational and charitable institutions, and St. Joe's is no exception. In 1807, parishioners founded St. Joseph's Orphan Asylum, a pressing need in light of the many children left parentless by the epidemics that swept the city in this period. Over the course of the next half-century, a school, a hospital, and various associations, including the city's first St. Vincent de Paul Society, were formed under the auspices of St. Joseph's Church. During part of the period of Jesuit suppression, diocesan, Augustinian, and Franciscan priests had charge of St. Joe's, but Bishop Francis Kenrick returned it to the Jesuits in 1833, and it has been a Jesuit church ever since. A notable associate in the 1820s was John Hughes, who was assigned to St. Joe's for a few years en route to his episcopal career as Archbishop of New York, where he became the nation's most voluble defender of Catholicism. In 1837, the present church was constructed. 3 years later, it hosted a celebration of the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Society of Jesus by Ignatius Loyola. If you'd like to know more about the Jesuits, we have a podcast on that topic. That same year saw the unveiling of the Crucifixion, modeled after a famous painting by Peter Paul Rubens. That's the striking centerpiece you'll see today above the altar if you visit Old St. Joe's. From 1844 to 1869, St. Joe's pastor was the French Jesuit Félix Barbelin, who has been called the Apostle of Philadelphia for his role in the rapidly growing Catholic community. One of the youngsters growing up in St. Joe's under Father Barbelin was Martin I.J. Griffin. Griffin grew up to be a historian, one of the founders of the first organization devoted to U.S. Catholic history, the Philadelphia-based American Catholic Historical Society. In 1882, Griffin published a booklet, The History of Old St. Joseph's Parish. It's one of the sources I used for this podcast. Here's the final paragraph of Griffin's text. So ends our history of Old St. Joseph's. It will be valuable when I am dead. May I live in and practice the faith taught me at the dear old church, about which happy recollections of my boyhood days linger joyously. Martin Griffin died in 1911, but his history and his dear old church remain, vivid reminders of the early days of Catholicism in the state of Pennsylvania. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Catholic History Trek. You can reach us at catholichistorytrek@gmail.com.